Coolant mixed with oil? 6 serious causes you shouldn't ignore. If coolant is mixing with oil, this is not a normal problem, and it is not something you should ignore, because once coolant gets into the engine oil, lubrication starts breaking down. And when that happens, bearings, camshafts, and other internal parts can wear out very quickly. Sometimes you notice milky oil, sometimes white smoke, sometimes overheating, and sometimes the engine starts running worse and worse before you realize how serious the problem is. In this video, I will show you 6 serious causes of coolant mixing with oil and why each one matters. So before you keep driving and make the damage worse, let's go step by step. Cause number 1, blown head gasket. This is one of the most common causes. The head gasket sits between the engine block and the cylinder head. Its job is to keep oil, coolant, and combustion pressure separated. But if the head gasket fails, coolant and oil can begin mixing together. This can also cause overheating, white exhaust smoke, coolant loss, misfires, or pressure buildup in the cooling system. In some cases, the engine may still run, but that does not mean the problem is small. A blown head gasket can quickly turn into major engine damage if you keep driving. Cause number 2, cracked cylinder head. A cracked cylinder head can create the same kind of problem. If a crack forms in the right place, coolant can leak into an oil passage, or oil can leak into a coolant passage. This is more likely if the engine has overheated badly before, because extreme heat can warp or crack the cylinder head. The symptoms may look very similar to a blown head gasket. You may see milky oil, coolant loss, overheating, or white smoke. That is why proper diagnosis matters, because replacing the gasket alone will not solve the issue if the head itself is cracked. Cause number 3, cracked engine block. This is one of the more serious causes. If the engine block cracks, coolant and oil can mix internally. This can happen after severe overheating, freezing damage, or major internal stress. A cracked block is usually a much bigger repair than a gasket problem, and in some cases, it can mean the engine needs major rebuilding or replacement. This is not the most common cause, but it does happen, especially if the engine was driven too hot for too long. So if coolant is mixing with oil and the damage seems severe, a cracked block has to be considered. Cause number 4, bad oil cooler or oil cooler gasket. Some engines use an oil cooler to help control oil temperature. In certain designs, coolant flows through or around the oil cooler. If the cooler cracks internally or its gasket fails, coolant and oil can start mixing. This cause is important because it can sometimes look like a blown head gasket, even though the real problem is somewhere else. That is why some engines get misdiagnosed. The owner sees coolant in the oil or oil in the coolant and assumes the worst. But sometimes the oil cooler is the actual cause. So depending on the vehicle, this is one of the first things that should be checked. Cause number 5, intake manifold gasket failure. On some engines, the intake manifold gasket also helps seal coolant passages. If that gasket fails, coolant may leak into the engine and eventually contaminate the oil. This depends on the engine design. Not every engine has this kind of setup, but on engines that do, a failed intake manifold gasket can absolutely cause coolant and oil contamination. The symptoms may include coolant loss, milky oil, rough running, misfires, or overheating. This is another reason why you should not guess, because the exact source of the leak matters. Cause number 6, severe overheating that leads to internal damage. And finally, one more serious cause. Sometimes overheating itself is not the original source of the problem, but it becomes the reason coolant starts mixing with oil later. Why? Because once an engine gets hot enough, parts can warp, gaskets can fail, and cracks can form. That means even if the engine did not start with coolant in the oil, a severe overheating event can lead to it afterward. This is why an overheated engine should never be ignored, because one cooling problem can quickly turn into multiple internal engine problems. Now here is the big takeaway. If coolant is mixing with oil, do not keep driving like normal, because oil contaminated with coolant cannot protect the engine properly. And the longer the engine runs, the greater the risk of damaging bearings, timing components, and other moving parts. Some people notice this problem as a milky substance under the oil cap or on the dipstick. Others notice oil floating in the coolant, coolant disappearing, or repeated overheating. No matter how it appears, this is a serious warning sign. So if you suspect coolant is mixing with oil, check for the pattern. Is the engine overheating? Is coolant disappearing? Is there white smoke from the exhaust? Does the oil look milky? Is the engine running rough? If several of those signs show up together, the car needs proper diagnosis quickly. So let's quickly recap. Coolant mixed with oil may be caused by a blown head gasket, a cracked cylinder head, a cracked engine block, a bad oil cooler or oil cooler gasket, an intake manifold gasket failure, or severe overheating that caused internal engine damage. This is not a warning sign to put off until later, because once coolant and oil mix, engine damage can get expensive fast. And now I want to hear from you. What did you notice first? Milky oil, coolant loss, white smoke, or overheating? Comment below with the first sign you noticed. And if enough people mention the same one, I will make the next video on how to tell where coolant and oil are mixing from.